Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Chala, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Ches, and we're going to continue on Daf Ches Amud Aleph towards the end of the third line from the top of the Amud. Now, what we had at the end of Daf Zayin was Rabbi Lazar, who asked whether the Omer can be brought from the old crop, as we explained. That if any one of the 5 grains, let's speak now about barley because the question is only shayach to barley, but the din is on all of the 5 grains. If they took root after the omer, whether it's before the ktsira, whether it's before the bringing, that was the whole machlokes, whichever one, then the halacha is that the omer won't be matir for us to eat any one of those 5 grains. They continue to have the status of chadash, which is prohibited to be consumed until the omer of the next year. When they bring the omer of the next year, that omer is going to permit any one of these 5 grains. So Rabbi Lazar was wondering that even though generally we know that there is a rule that ein toidemin uma'asrin michadash al yashan va'al yashan al chadash, and therefore logic should be that we should apply the same rule to the bringing of the omer. And here, the definition of Chadash and Yashan, this is important, will not be the same as it is when we're learning now in Chala about the din of Chadash. Din of Chadash, we just said, that produce that did not take root before the Omer remains Chadash until the next year's Omer. Or when there's no Mizbeach yet, until the next year, according to the Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai, the end of the 16th day. But when it comes to other dinim, Trumas u'Maisres, so the rule is by grain that became ready at least a third prior to Rosh Hashanah, meaning Echad B'Tishrei, that is grain that belongs to the old year. Grain that only reached the stage of Shlish after Rosh Hashanah is grain of the new year. When a person has these grains, when it comes to all of the dinim of Trumas u'Maisres, you can't take Truma from the old on the new and the new on the old. So therefore, there is a logic to say that just like you cannot be toidim u'ma'aser from new and old, that the omer should come from chadash, real chadash. On the other hand, Rabbi Lazar thought, since we just learned that this grain, which indeed concerning the dinim of trumas u'maisres will be defined as yashan, but when it comes to the dinim of can you eat it mitzat chadash, it's still chadash. It's only going to be allowed to be consumed after the omer is brought in the next year. So if it's becoming permitted from the omer, maybe it can become the permitter. Maybe it can become the matir. Maybe you can bring the omer from it. Now the Gemara itself on Daf Zayin Amud Beis said that the Chevra, when they heard the question, they right away challenged him. Why did you even ask? Efsher loymar. Why are you? What's even your question? That's fine. What we're going to learn today until the new Mishnah is that Rabbi Lazar himself answered his question. Not that, how can you even ask? No, he asked the question. He gave the same answer. There's actually going to be 2 versions as to what he answered. And that's going to bring us back to a unique halacha by Kachim, which is gavaldik to remember, to review, or to learn for the first time, that when the Torah tells us something must be done, even though generally, there is no lechatchila b'di'evet on dinei doiraisa. But there are exceptions. And there's a rule by Kachim that if a certain halacha is repeated twice in the Torah, whether it's Shina HaKasuv or Shana HaKasuv or HaKasuv Shina Olav, however you verbalize it, in that context, Chazal is saying is that if a certain law is repeated twice by Kachim, it means that it's essential, it's ma'akev, it's a din of even b'di'evet it will not be good. That's a unique din by Kachim, and we're going to see, according to some version of what Rabbi Lazar responded, that not only is the halacha going to be that lechatchila you have to bring the omer from the crop that only reached the third after Rosh Hashanah, but if you did not only lechatchila but even b'di'evet, if you brought it, it won't even be helpful. It won't do anything because of this rule of hakos of shina olav lahakif. Now, the Mishnah Beis that we have, halacha Beis that we have in the middle of Daf Ches Amud Aleph, some of it we already learned above. Some of today's Daf is going to be a great review of a sugya that we had on Daf Dalid. But first of all, the Mishnah is going to add two new dinim that are shaykh only to the Chamisha Devanim. In other words, when the Chazal, when the Torah and Torah Shabbal Peh explains, is talking about grain, it's referring only to the 5 grains. Chitim sa'idem kusmen shabei l'shual shifain, wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye, to the exclusion of all other grains. Number 1, chametz u'matzah are only connected to these 5 grains, both in the positive, as we'll see in the Mishnah, for a person to fulfill his or her obligation of eating a kazayis matzah that we're chayiv to have in the night of Pesach. But erev treichlu matzahs is a mitzvah, is a commandment, something that we must do. Can only come from the 5 grains. And why is it? Because where are you yoytze? From what are you yoytze? The mitzvah of matzah, only from that which could become chametz. And even though to the unlearned, to the unaware, when you look at other flours that are mixed with water and you leave it standing, it does inflate. There is a certain external similarity to the process of chimutz. Nevertheless, Chazal told us that there's chimutz and then there is rotting or some other type of process that inflates, that swells, but it's called sirgain and not chimutz. And that is not going to be included in the prohibition of eating chametz. So this is another din that shaykh to these 5 grains. And the second din the Mishnah is going to bring is when it comes to a vow. If a person makes a vow not to eat pas, not to eat tfuah, not to eat dagan, even though that by nedarim generally, nedarim doesn't need to follow other halachas in the Torah, because when God uses a word, and when people use the same word, it doesn't always mean the same thing. And by nedarim halech achar loshen b'nei adam dafka, it's not about loshen Torah. Nevertheless, we're going to see that if a person makes a vow not to eat pas or tfuah, and then there's a machlekes Rav Meir and the Chachamim, what will be the din if he says not to have dagan? We're going to see whether that's also connected, in most cases, according to most opinions, to the 5 grains. Now, what we will have on Daf Ches is a flashback to Daf Dalid, where we had this amazing machlekes between Rabbi Yechanan and Eish Lakish when it comes to the din of combining, of tziruf. And there we were speaking about a person who made a dough that has the minimum shear, which is 5 quarters, or 43.2 eggs, or lakula alma, 5 pounds of flour. But it's not of one type, it's a combination of the 5 types. And the question that we had, the logic, what's the issue? You have the minimum shear, is that maybe we should apply the din of bittul in a very unusual way, that since each one of the types is in the minority, because when you look at your wheat, well, wheat is 1, but aside of the wheat, you have the barley and the spelt, etc. So you have more. It's not 1 and 1. The wheat, each one is viewed as a minority of the types. And maybe it's considered, maybe it will undergo the halachic rule of bittul. And if it's batul, then it cannot halachically comprise the minimum share, which would mean you wouldn't have the obligation. If you remember that even according to Rabbi Yechanan, that says that prohibitions, isurim, are not going to nullify one or the other. In the case that I just gave, the Gemara suggested, I think Rabbi Chizda suggested, he will agree that there will not be a biblical obligation of taking challah. Why? Because since you never had the chiyuv of challah, in the case that I just gave, which is that you only have the sum total minimum share of challah when you combine all of the 5 grains together. You only have 1 pound of wheat and 1 pound of barley, which means that each type in itself doesn't have an obligation of challah. There is no isur of tevel vis-a-vis before taking off challah because you don't have the minimum share. So mutter and mutter, heter and heter will be mevatel one or the other. That's a machlekes that we had above, and we're going to see how this beautifully is going to be connected to today's share. So without any further ado, Chavra Daf Ches again, Amud Aleph, Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Lazar. No, it's the Gemara was wondering on Rabbi Lazar's shaila, Rabbi Lazar's shal, efshar loymar, for sure not. The Gemara already said before, for sure you cannot bring the oimer from the grain that reached a shlish prior to Rosh Hashanah of the previous year. Nice. The Gemara wants you to know that Rabbi Elazar himself, well, he asked the question. He didn't have it as a given, but he came to the same conclusion. Elamad, there are two versions as to what he said, and the Gemara is going to tell you there is a nafkamina between each version. In other words, the general consensus, everyone other than Rab Ze'eda, all the Chevra said that Rabbi Elazar answered his question by saying that since we have, and take a look in Torah Oir Hashalim, in Parshas Emoir, right, Vayikra Chav Gimel, Daber al Bnei Yisrael v'Martu Aleim, Ki sovaya lo aretz asher ani noisin lachem uksartem es ktsira. V'have'esem es oimer reishis ketzirchem el hakoyen, reishis ketzirchem. So reishis ketzircha, says Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Elazar, is teaching you v'loi soif ketzircha, not the last. What do I mean by the last? Guys, someone mentioned it in last year. Something that took root after the oimer. But it took root after the Omer. I don't know. I'm not a farmer. I forgot. I think it's 50 days. The Chazal tell us how long you harvested that by Shavuos. In other words, it's not the beginning of your harvest. It's probably the oldest flour available. No one ate it because it's Chadash, but it's old. And I want to make a point that even though, yes, we learned that you're not even allowed to harvest Chadash prior to the Omer, I mentioned, I don't know if the grain will survive a winter in the ground. These grains were harvested. It was an old harvest. Not old, who knows, 20 years old. Grain was wealth. People stored grain. Whoever went to Matzada, you saw where he stored the water, where he stored grain. Grain can last for many, many years. And that's what happened over here. Pashat Nor Reishis Ketzircha is being merames that when the Torah is speaking about Vahavi Esem as Oimer, bring the Oimer, it should be something that was freshly harvested, not something that was harvested a while back. Beautiful. Another version of what Rabbi Elazar answered, and this is only Rab Ze'eda. Rab Ze'eda says that we learn it from the word Bikurim. Now the word Bikurim, again, Torah Oira Shalom, is a word that we find in the beginning of Vayikra, even though the Torah does not explicitly say Oimer, but we keep on mentioning it. That verse is in reference to the Oimer. I'm reading the pasuk, Ve'im takriv minchas bikurecha. The mincha of Bikurim is in reference to the Oimer, Lashem. It has to be Aviv, which means Sa'oirim, Kolui, Ba'esh, Geres, Karmel, Takriv, Eis, Minchas, Bikurecha. So says Rab Ze'eda, B'Shem Rabbi Elazar, that the word Bikurim, Pasha, touch the word Bikurim. Bikurim means that, Bechar, the first ripe ones. Okay? The grain that you have from the previous year, Ein Elu Bikurim. You can't call them the first ripe. They were not the first that became ripe. These are the last from, in other words, last doesn't mean the one that just became. It's Alta grain. Now, when you read this, okay, whether Rabbi Elazar responded from Reishis Ketzircha or whether he understands it from the word Bikurim, sounds like he's coming to the same conclusion. And the Gemara wonders, my nafak mi beineihain, right? My nafkemina. Remember, way back when I went to the Holy Land, I used that lashon to the Israelis. They didn't understand what I'm talking. My nafkemina. This is not modern Hebrew. I found that out on the ground. So the Gemara says, no, there is a nafkemina whether Rabbi Elazar responded from Reishis Ketzircha or whether he responded from Bikurim, because what were to happen, l'shitas Rabbi Elazar, avar vehevi. If whatever people ended up bringing the Omer from the Chadash that took root right after last year's Omer. So al da'atoin the Chavraya who say that Rabbi Elazar learned that you should not from the pasuk Reishis Ketzircha, then the din will be even b'di'evet pasul, it would not be valid. Al daite the Rab Ze'eda stam lahoir, that we have here Rab Ze'eda with the hey at the end, and we have Rab Ze'eda with an aleph at the end. And that has to be looked in. B'chlal on the Bavli, Rab Ze'eda is without an ayin. Just to know, you'll see over there. Another thing is that we know by Rabbi Akiva, there's a big argument how to spell Rabbi Akiva. The Oir Zerua, like I mentioned just not that long ago, that the Alter Rebbe gave so much chashivus to the Oir Zerua, Rishon. He wrote in the Hagdama of his Sefer why he's naming his halacha Sefer Oir Zerua. And he says that he struggled forever to determine whether Akiva is written with an aleph at the end or a hey at the end. That's a halacha l'maisa. I know I write ksubas. It's nish geferlach, but people who write gittin, you have to write it correctly. He didn't know. And Bachlal, we know that in the Yerushalmi, Akiva is written with a hey. In the Bavli, it's written with an aleph. And he made, I think, a shayla cholam, or it came to him. I don't know whether he initiated, Sarusa de Lasata, Sarusa de Laela, and he dreamt, Oir Zarua Latzadei Kol Yishrei Leiv Simcha. And he understood Beruach Kotshoy of the Or Zarua that the last letter of each word of this pasuk forms Reb Akiva Simcha with a hey. It's consequential. Generally, what I learned is that when it comes to a Shem Kodesh, meaning from the holy tongue, you write the word with a hey at the end, and all of the Yiddish names come with an aleph at the end. That's a rule which might have exceptions. Anyway, I'm just pointing out over here that Rab Ze'eda is written like this, it's written like that, but al date the Rab Ze'eda, b'di'evid, it's going to be kosher. Now, what's amazing is that if you look at the Noise Kalim printed, Marafulda, the Pnei Moshe, the earliest Rashi Ilyo, they don't explain how we got there. Like, why is it that according to Chavraya, it's going to be where? Rab Chaim Kanievsky, right, that's our generation's mefarish on the Yerushalmi, writes Gavaldik. He's the one that says, based on the rule of Kachim, like we mentioned in the intro, it's good to remember that Hakos of Shina Olav La'akev, which is a rule only by Kachim, in other areas of the Torah, of course, there has to be a reason. If Hashem repeats something twice, it's never stam. But we don't learn, to tell you that it's b'di'evet. Even b'di'evet, it's not good. That's only a rule by Kachim. We are speaking about Kachim. Now, where do you have Reishis Ketzircha written twice? That was the chap of Rab Chaim Kanievsky. These words that we have from Parshas Emor, the literal words Reishis Ketzircha, are not written twice. But he argues that in Parshas Re'ei, in Devarim, the Torah writes, Shiva Shavua is Tispar Loch, Mehochel Chermesh Bakama. From when you begin cutting down the standing grain. And Mehochel Chermesh and Reishis Ketzircha have the same toichen, even though it's not the same word. So if he learned it from Reishis Ketzircha, since there is another such exact expression, Mehochel Chermesh Bakana, Shina Hakosav La'akev, or Shana Hakosav La'akev, however you pronounce it, puzzle. But the word Bikurim that we find in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra is only written once in the Torah regarding the Omer, only once. So then the pshat will be is that lechatchila you got to bring it from the chadash, from the new crop. But the di'evet, if you bring it from the old crop, then it's going to be good. And again, I'm saying now by heart that when we had in the last year that the Gemara said Efshal Omer, what's even your question? When you tell a person your question is not even a question, also mashma that it's b'di'evet, also not going to be good. Like it's not shaykh. When you're going to deal with shidduchim, you're going to hear this a lot. Oh, that's not shaykh. Okay. So now says the Gemara. Divrei Chachamim. These are the words of the Chachamim. And who is that? Rabbi Yosi Barabun. You have to know how to learn. It's really B'Shem, Rab Chia. Just the Yerushalmi doesn't write B'Shem. But it's Rab Chia Barbun, in the name of Rab Chia, in the name of Rav and Bar Chia. That what? What are we already spoke it up by heart the whole time. Just it was what we spoke out about, a third before Rosh Hashanah, a third after Rosh Hashanah. That's written in the Gemara here. In other words, the definition of new crop and old crop, that's our whole topic, means, it's when are we saying that either lachatchila or according to Chavraya, B'Shem, Rabbi Lazar, even b'di'evet, if you bring the omer from the barley that took root after last year's omer, it's not going to be good. That's because they belong to last year's product when it comes to the dinim of Trumas or Maisres, which is the Heim Sheviu Shlish Lifnei Rosh Hashanah, but Avalim Heviu Shlish Lachar Rosh Hashanah, it's a Chiddush. Even if they became a Shlish shortly after Rosh Hashanah, now one might have argued, well, if barley became ready, let's say in Chodesh Cheshvan or in Kislev, and then you have barley that became ready on Nisan, one could have argued, well, if the Torah says Reishis Ketzircha, if the Torah says Bikurim, bring it from the newest. That not. We don't go to that. Then Ha'omer Ba Mehem, and I understand Ba Mehem means even on a level of Lechatchila. Even on Lechatchila. No, it's not bring from the most recent. Bring from the halachic recent. What's halachic recent? The Rosh Hashanah is the New Year's when it comes to the termination of the year of Trumas U'Maisris, and that's what it means. Nothing more than that. Did it reach a third before, or did it reach a third later? This is Gavaldik. Okay, and now we're moving on to the second Mishnah in this Masechta. Masechta's Chala. So what did we learn? We learned about Chala. Don't worry, we're going to come back to Chala. Even in today's daf, we'll have plenty about Chala, but the Mishnah is. So we learned Chala, we learned Chadash, the din of Chadash, and now we're going to learn two other dinim. If you remember, we read, I think, in Daf Beis or Daf Gimel, the first Gra on the Masechta, that when we spoke out on ourselves, so why does it say Chamisha Devarim? Why does it not say Chamisha Minim? So we gave our own suggestion, but the Gra writes, no, it says Chamisha Devarim because there are 5 halachis which touches upon only the 5 grains. And so we had to, now we're learning another 2 of the 5 halachis. Chametz U'Matzah and Adara. Says the Mishnah, Ha'oichel mehem. Only someone who eats matzah baked from them meaning from wheat or barley or spelt or oats or rye, not matzah made from who knows what, from rice, from millet, from potato starch, from fennel, from tapioca, and ask our wives and they'll give you another list of 20 flours that, it's by the
fennel.
Way,
fennel, not fennel.
There we go. That makes a big difference. So
tapioca.
Yeah. Kezayis matzah bePesach. Only if you eat from it the kezayis matzah will you be yotze yedei chavasoi. Right? As we know from Chazal, that even though it says shivas yomim toichel matzahs, there's another pasuk that says sheishes yomim toichel matzahs. So that's the 8th principle. That since yotze michloloi, since God says eat it for 7 days, then it says only eat it for 6 days. You know what that means? Just like the 7th day is no longer obligatory because it says 6 days, it's telling you that none of the 7 days is obligatory. Yachol, it's never obligatory, but erev toichlo matzahs. That's the Chazal. In other words, the night. We're speaking here about there is a choiv to eat matzah the night of. Now, because of minig, because of us not living in the Holy Land or in those locations where then they did not know when Beis Din was Machadesh, Rosh Chodesh, Nisan, so we have a suffix, we have 2-day Seder. So on both nights of the Seder, we have an obligation to eat a Kezayis Chametz, Kezayis Matzah, and likewise in the reverse, the polarity that if a person has the Kezayis of Chametz, the Chayiv Kodes, but what are the Chayiv Kodes? Only if the chametz came from the 5 grains. And if a person put rice in water and they let it sit and it became inflated, and one would say, it became chametz, halachically, it started to rot, it started to decompose. It did not become chametz. There was no prohibition of kodesh, even though we learned the machlekes tanoim. Guys, don't forget. Okay. Now, here we go. This is going to bring us back to Daf Dalit. Now the Mishnah adds another nuance. That nesarev echad mihem b'chol haminim. If you have one of these 5 flour from one of these 5 that became chametz, but it's not pure chametz. It's what we call in halacha ta'aroives chametz, right? And we also know, my friends, that chametz is one of the big exceptions, chametz and avodah zarah, that it's never bottle. I know that, but there's no chiyuv kodes, because you have to have a kezayis. Furthermore, there is another lav, not connected to eating, the lav of bal yiroah, bal yematzah, of owning. To begin with, there's no chiyuv kodes. And if a person owns even chametz that's mixed with other types, they are violating. Hareze oiver bepesach. Gevaldik. Okay. A look inside the marafulda. It's a little bit under the middle. It's still in the narrow lines. It's 2/3 down in the narrow lines. Nesarev echad mehem b'chol haminim, which means nesarev echad mechamisha haminim elu. B'shar taroives mixed with other foods, not mixed with other flours. Kuta chabavli, Kevan loves kuta chabavli was moldy breadcrumbs, moldy in whey, and I think the whey was also good rotten. It wasn't today's whey. Today's whey they separated from the water, and salt. And the Yerushalmis, they couldn't take it, and the Babylonians got used to it. So that's something that has in it chametz. Or he writes Sheikh Hamadi. Sheikh Hamadi is what we call beer, because the beer that they made in the times of Chazal was I think fig. I think they used fruits to make beer. The Medians,
I think dates.
Dates. Danny is right, dates. But Persians, they were the ones that made beer from barley. Beer from barley. Our beer is mamish chametz. But you think about it, how much barley is in it? Ruba is the water. Doesn't matter. So here the Mishnah is saying that the potency of chametz mechamishes haminim, even when it gets mixed in other things, is such that it never becomes nullified. And even if you don't eat it, you're going to be oived again on the lav of bal yirah and bal yimatzeh. And now we're going into the second din of the Mishnah, which is if a person verbalizes a vow. Either or. If a person makes a neder that bread is prohibited on me. Don't forget, guys, neder and shvua are not the same. Shvua is an isur gavra, and it can be both in the positive and the negative. It can be both in the past and the future. A person can make a proper oath by saying, I swear that I didn't eat, or that I did eat. Right? These are the shtayim shein arba by shvuas bitoy, or that I won't eat, that I will eat. Neder, not about the past, ever. Neder is a person making something prohibited on him or on her. Right? You can either say that bread is prohibited on me like a korban, right? Hatfasa. There's a machlokes rishonim whether be'iked a neder should be by linking it to something else that we made asur, which is a korban, right? Or if you are matvasit, you have to be matvasit, right? Bedavar hanadur, and not something that God prohibited. If a person says that bread in the world is prohibited to me like chazer, then those words are nonsensical, because chazer Hashem made asur. Here I'm making it asur. But whatever that is, you make a neder. Now, if you use the word pas, I vow that pas is prohibited for me. Or if you use the word tfuah, so the din is again, what does pas include? What does pas exclude? Pas and or tfuah only include the 5 minim. Only asur bohem, meaning that a person then could eat. You can have rice bread. And again, there's going to be a novelty by nedarim, because since by nedarim halech achar loshen b'nei adam, it's not negeya only how halacha understands the word pas utfua. There is also a necessity to know what people have in mind when they use these words. But here the Mishnah is saying it includes them. However, divrei Rav Meir, that hanoider min hadagan. If a person says, I will not eat dagan, really it's bad, that dagan is prohibited on me, you are speaking about dagan. Dagan literally means that which is piled. Midei de midgan, by the way, what we call today kidneys, what I mentioned before, or potatoes are not kidneys, they are also piled. But the word, if a person says dagan, then eina asur elo mehen. Now, what's very unusual about this machlekes, this is really rare, is that normally when Tanoim argue, they are arguing about the same case. Here, Rav Meir is speaking about pas and tfuah. The Chachamim are not mentioning pas and tfuah. The Chachamim oimrim, and by the way, Chachamim oimrim means they argue with Rav Meir. Because whenever you initiate a new conversation, you go Amar. Amru Chachamim. Right? Or in the Gemara, just to know where is the word Amar written. If the word Amar is written before the name, or before Chachamim, then it's something new. If it's Chachamim Oimrim, they are speaking about something that was said before. So there's no question that the Chachamim are arguing with Rav Meir. What's really unclear is, are they arguing about Pasut Tfuah, or are they arguing about Dagan? Even though Chachamim never said what they hold on Pasut Tfuah, Rav Meir never said what he holds by Dagan. And we'll see in the Gemara clarifies that they are only arguing when the word dagan is used. The Gemara is going to show you that when it comes to pas and tfuah, the Chachamim agree with Rav Meir. If a person says, I prohibit pas on me, I prohibit tfuah on me, bein Rav Meir, bein Chachamim, you're only prohibited in the 5 minim. According to Rav Meir, if a person says, I'm prohibiting dagan on me, dagan is called midei de midgan, and it will be more inclusive. Anything that farmers harvest and then they put on a pile. But the Chachamim are only arguing with the Dagan that the Mishnah doesn't even write what Rav Meir says. The Chachamim says that even the word Dagan, because of by Nedarim Halech Achar Lashon B'nei Adam, I know that fennel could be piled, even though I don't know, I'm just guessing. I just want to chazer the name correct, not to get the Gabbai nervous. But, or rice is piled. And therefore, Rav Meir holds that Hanoidir min Hadagan, he won't be allowed to eat rice. The Chachamim say, no. That even if the word Dagan is used, it's also Eina Asad Elamehem. So again, I just spoke out a shtickle of the Gemara that we're going to have today. Now the Mishnah says words at the end, and again, beautiful. I love something unusual. What the Mishnah writes now, you can argue, if you don't know the context of Rabbi here in the Mishnah, what this final statement implies is inaccurate. Rabbi is writing these words as an introduction to Halacha Gimel. So let me just read the words and let me show you how, if you don't see this as an introduction to the next Mishnah, then it won't make sense. Says Rabbi, V'chayavin, we're talking about the 5 grains, right? V'chayavin b'chala u'b'maisres. Now hold on. V'chayavin b'chala is accurate, but it's superfluous. That is the first part of Halacha Aleph. That's the beginning of Masechtas Chala. That Chamisha Devarim Achayiv and Chala. Why would the Rebbe have to repeat it? Okay, so it's extra. But when he writes that the 5 grains are Chayiv and Maisres, that's true. But hold on. Everything we learned until now, we learned 4 dinim. Chala, Kadosh, Chametz Matzah, and Neder. When we speak about the 5 grains, we are saying only the 5 and not other minim. Maisres, whoever learned with us, we were Baruch Hashem a long while into Zerayim. What are you talking about? Everything is Chayv and Maisres. Now you can argue only Midrabanan. So what? But you can't say that only these 5 and Chayv b'Maisres when everything else is Chayv and Maisres. However, what is Rebbe really saying? That if you look quickly, guys, go to Daf Tes, the Mishnah is going to write over there that Elu Chayavin b'Chala u'pturim in ha'Maisres. Elu Chayavin b'Maisres u'pturim in ha'Chala. In other words, in the next Mishnah, Halacha Gimel, we're going to go through items that not everything is both Chayv Chala and Chayv Maisres. Once you know that, these words make sense. Rebbe is not implying that other minim are not Chayv and Maisres. They are. Rebbe is not being machadesh that the Chamisha Devarim are Chayv b'Chala. We know that from the beginning of Halacha Aleph. Rebbe is saying that by these 5, you have both the obligation of Chala and the obligation of Maisres. And then, as we'll see later, we will enumerate many other species in which either Chala and not Maisres, or Maisres and not Chala. Just that's the meaning of the last line of the Mishnah. But coming back, the first din of Halacha Beis was a din of Chametz U'Matzah, in which Rebbe is saying that ha'oichel mehem, if you eat from it, let's go to Chametz, God forbid, on Pesach, you're chayiv kares. I'm saying on Pesach because even though we may not eat chametz, b'yom harishon tashbisu, that already refers to Erev Pesach, midoy raisa halachik nun, but the isur of kares, right, the penalty of kares begins at night. Now there's 2 ways of understanding the words of the Mishnah. Ha'oichel mehem, ha'oichel mehem. I'm talking about now the kezayis chametz chayiv bihi kares. The initial understanding of the Gemara that ha'oichel mehem also includes if you had a dough that is a combination of the 5 minim, not a dough of wheat or of barley or etc., and it became chametz chayv kares. That ha'oichel mehem also will include a dough that you have a kazayis, because here we're not talking about challah, for which you need to have 5 pounds. Kazayis is whatever a kazayis is. Even if the kazayis is comprised of all of the 5, you're going to be chayiv kares. And this will lead us back to Daf Dalet. If you remember again, the machlokes Reish Lakish and Rabbi. And let's read it inside. Again, based on the understanding, the initial understanding, that ha'oichel mehem includes eating chametz that's a mixture of the 5 grains. It's not chametz, wheat chametz, barley chametz. It's all of the 5 minim chametz. Because you had a flour that was a mixture of all of the 5, and then you added water, and then you allowed it to become chametz. Another detail, kares is a ruchni yazdika punishment. there's also malchus. It's not a contradiction. All right? Even though that there are some who opine, remember that whole machlekes, we apply that to punishments of Beis Din. So eina loike umeshalem. You won't be put to death in Beis Din and get malchus or pay. That we don't do. But Kadis and malchus, just to know. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yaakov bar Zavdi, based on the premise that ha'oichel mehem implies even if there is a mixture, you have a kazayis not of one. The kazayis is comprised of all of the five. That still, the Mishnah says you chayiv kadis, which also means you chayiv malchus. Kadis is a doiraisa. The Rabbanan, you never chayiv kadis. So you say, no, choloikin al chalos and dvar toira. Now, by the way, this poses a question on whom? Befedish on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said on Daf Dalit, and I know that we're talking about challah. So what? Reish Lakish says that if you made a dough that has in it the five types, you have the shear, but it's only a mixture of the five types, not half wheat, half barley. That wouldn't work. Then there's no roiv. It's made out of 3 of the 5 or 5 of the 5, which means that if you look at each type by itself, it's a minority of the other types. So based on the dinim of bittul, even though you have the total 43.2 eggs, Reish Lakish says you're taka chayv to remove challah only midrabanan, but it's only midrabanan. So therefore, if a non-kohen eats that challah, they're not going to get malchus. They're not going to get malchus. Why? Because bittul. So l'cha'oira Reish Lakish should have said the same thing over here, which is that if you make kazayas from a mixture of the 5 grains, even though it became chametzik, you don't really halachically have a kazayas of chametz. For you to be chayiv malchus, for you to get punished, you have to have a shear. Even if chatzi shear asan min hatoida, you're not going to get punished. Why would you be chayiv malchus? Why isn't there a shear? That's a kasha, because each one became nullified in the others. Even if each one had the same amount, it's not like you have more wheat and barley. You have the same exact amount. You have a 1/5 of wheat and a 1/5 of barley, a 1/5 of a kazais, and a 1/5 of spelt, v'chulei. So what? Wheat is a minority of the other 4 types, as is barley, as is spelt, as in oats, as in rye.
So this, Rabbi, does that mean that if for some reason, whatever, you have a couple of grams more of one versus the other, that completely gets rid of this whole argument?
Let me say what Vlad is saying in different words. Even if you only had 2 types, if one was more than the other, Vlad, and we don't know which one is more than the other because that was the pigel and the noiser, and we don't know, and the person was given a hasra, don't eat this because it's roiv wheat or roiv barley, that's hasra safik. Very good. Okay, we had that all above. I'm sorry, Rabbi Blano, what were you saying? So Rabbi Blano was saying maybe chametz is more chamer. The Gemara is not going to go down that road. The easiest way out is the Mishnah never said it's a mixture. That's what I said. It says ha'oichel mehem. Ha'oichel mehem could mean you had a kazayis of only one. No, it's you're asking a kasha based on a premise. The premise is not written. That's the first answer in the Chesam base. So Rabbi Yirmiyah b'shem Rabbi Chia Barva, okay, Tiftoid, interpret the Mishnah, not if you had a kazayis of a mixture. No. Mehem means you had a kazayis of chametz, wheat chametz, barley chametz. Whatever you had, it was a full kazayis of that type. Sha'achal kazayis mizeh or kazayis mizeh. The Mishnah never mentioned about siruf. The Mishnah never mentioned anything about a mixture. That is answer number 1. That's good. And now the Gemara attempts to give an answer number 2, and it's going to be ironic that the one who gives answer number 2 is contradicting something that he said above. Amar Rabbi Yosi, afilu teimar kazayis mikulhen. Rabbi Blauner, he's saying what you're saying, but he's adding a lot of flavor, which is important, which is, no, the Mishnah is mehem. No, let's go. Mehem means from them mixed. But it's different. Chametz matzah is different than challah. Shanyahi, because shekulam l'shem chametz. Now you have to know how to word this. The Torah did not apply the isur of chametz on each of the 5 independently. Did not apply that. It's the same shame chametz. When it comes to challah, the way he understands that by challah, the obligation of challah applies to each of the 5 on their own right. In other words, if the din is on each one on their own right, there is shaykh to say it's going to become nullified, which is what Reish Lakish says. Because there are two different things. And I know that Begashmias, it's 5 different species. But halachically, are they different for you to say they're combining? By chametz, we bechlal do not differentiate. Each one is the same. Now, where does he get that from? I don't know.
But didn't we initially separate them in the at the beginning, that 2 and 3 are different, or 3 and 2 are different?
We don't even have to go there, Kevin. It's not about it's one different from the other 4. Now, different means physically, I know that they're different. But Rabbi Yossi is insisting that by challah, each one of the 5 is halachically considered to be an independent species. When it comes, again, and therefore, let's go to what Reish Lakish says. Since they are independent, they nullify each other. They're different. What's simple?
Like bread in the store, this one is this name. But they're all common.
So Rabbi Launer is speaking about a phenomena that we find amongst us, which is that when you go to the bakery, it's normal for you to ask, is it wheat? Is it barley? We want to know what we're eating. When it comes to chametz, no one asks, is it chametz from wheat, chametz from barley? Chametz or the nish chametz. But that's a manifestation of how people intuit what the Torah says. But he's saying this is a Torah din. It's beautiful. If since by chametz they're not independent, how can they be mevatla? They're all the same. Hold on. Now there's a problem with this. I'll tell you what the problem with this is. Machal Fashitasi, that Rabbi Yossi asks the Gemara, how can Rabbi Yossi be the one suggesting this answer? What I'm saying right now was something that Rabbi Yossi said for Rabbi Yochanan. I know. Don't forget, all of this posed a question on a Lakish. But let's go back to what we learned by Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, let me go back to the ground zero case, Vlad, was the case of Pigel and Noiser. Okay? Pigel and Noiser. And there, it's not 3 types. It's Pigel and Noiser. How can there be bittul? The case is that there was a little bit more pigel than noiser, or the other way around, a bissel more noiser than pigel, and someone ground up these meats and they mixed them together.
No,
Either you're going to be chayiv 2 sets of malchus or no malchus, and Rabbi Yochanan is the one that said you're chayiv 2 sets of malchus. Why are you chayiv 2 sets of malchus? Because Rabbi Yochanan has a premise that something that's prohibited cannot become nullified when it's mixed with something else that's prohibited. Iser veheter nullify each other. Heter veheter nullify each other. That was Rabbi Yochanan. And therefore, when the Gemara above was saying that if you have a mixture of 5 of the grains, let's go back to Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says you're only chayiv challah midrabanan. Rabbi Yochanan argued. Why did Rabbi? That was the Havamina. Rabbi Yochanan argues since Rabbi Yochanan holds that Isurim do not nullify one the other. It's getting late. Therefore, Yachayv challah midoraisa. Rabbi Yossi says nisht emes. Rabbi Yossi says by pigel, by noiser, prior to their getting mixed, it was already pigel. It's a davar ha'asur. It's already noiser. Isur and isur don't nullify one the other. But if you have the case that we're giving, the case above, where you have a total of 5 pounds, but each from all of the 5 grains, that means that each grain on their own doesn't have the minimum shear, so each grain on their own has no obligation to have challah removed from it. It got mixed prior to it being a davar ha'asur. Even oibazoi it does nullify. Taman hu Amar Rabbi Yossi said above shnei devarim rabim alechad mivatlin oisai. They do nullify each other. They do nullify each other. Why, Vlad? Because it's not pigel or noiser. Because it's not asur yet. So he was the one that said that for Hachen who Amar Hachi. How can Rabbi Yossi be the one in, allowing for our Mishnah to be also understood that if you have a kazayas comprised of several species, you're going to be chayiv malchus midoraisa? No, you would not be chayiv malchus midoraisa. Li Rabbi Yossi. He was the one that had that understanding. Now, what the Gemara does is the Gemara doesn't fanen for Rabbi Yossi. All the Gemara does is Amar Rabbi Yossi Berabun that Keni Masnisi. Therefore, the Mishnah has to be understood that not mehem as a mixture. Mehem means the first answer that we had on Rav Ches Amud Beis. Either a kazayas of one or a kazayas of the other. But the bewilderment, how can Rabbi Yossi use different logics here? That the Gemara didn't for. Let's go weiter. It is very easy shtickle. Guys, I want to start tomorrow Daf Gimel next year. Hanoidim in Apas. So first of all, we have to clarify. We said this all by heart. Ho hanoidim in Apasum in Atfua. Okay, we want to understand the Shitas Chachamim, because the Chachamim were the ones that only made a mention about Dagan. That if you said Dagan, then you only chai from the Chamisha. So the initial understanding is that they argue with Rav Meir in the case of Rav Meir. That does not make sense. That does not make sense. No one will hold that pas includes everything, and indeed it doesn't. So Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yechanan says, "Keinamas nisa." The pshat in the Chachamim is af hanoidim in adogan. Eino asur ela mehem. In other words, everyone agrees with what Rav Meir says. If a person uses the word pas, if a person uses the word tfuah, it's only from the Chamisha Minim. According to Rav Meir, if you use the word dagan, Rav Meir, kol midei the midgan. On that, the Chachamim say, even if you use the word dagan, it's only the 5. Now, man, non-kaiman, the Gemara wants to understand, what are we dealing with? What did he actually say? If he actually said, I am prohibiting that which the Torah calls pas. If that would be the case, then if the person says, I am prohibiting that which the Torah calls tfuah, pas and tfuah, the Mishnah wrote together. You know what else is called tfuah in the Torah? Believe it or not, wine. It says tfuah sakerim. So it can't be that the person who made the vow says, I am prohibiting pas Torah or tfuah Torah. No, because tfuah Torah would include taka grapes and product of grapes. Ella, he said pastam. Pastam, the Gemara is wondering in the kasha. L'cha'ira, you know what pastam is? Only wheat and barley. That was the Gemara's kasha. Pastam, you know, when people, even today, when people want to have spelt matzah, they call it spelt matzah. They don't call it matzah. Oat matzah, they don't call it matzah. Matzah is either wheat or barley. So that's the Gemara's kash again. Since by nedarim halech achaloshim neyadam iloch. So if the Mishnah is speaking about someone who says, I'm making a neder not to have pas, and we said lukula alma, it's the 5. Why 5? Answers the Gemara daftes. It's not true. It's not true. It depends on the place. Rabbi wrote the Mishnah in a place where people actually make bread, not only from the 5 minim, like today in America. They made rice bread, they made millet bread, they made many types of breads. And even though by nedarim halech achar loshem b'nei adam, people will still call spelt bread. There are enough people, stam. But rice bread, no one will call bread. They're going to call rice bread. Amar Rabbi Yoisa, kayamte b'makem she'oichlin pas koil. The Mishnah is speaking about a location like what we are familiar with, that people make breads from everything. And yet, dafka because halech achar loshem b'nei adam, people allow themselves to use the word bread stam only by the chamisha saminim. Ein locha pari pastam el chamisha. Now, why is this negeya? Because if you live in a place, which might be the place right now in Los Angeles, that when people say bread, if the roiv b'nei adam don't only have in mind the chamisha saminim, nedarim is taka different. It's very important that Rambam writes it again and again. In other words, even though we're going from Torah Shebal Peh, so we're quoting what was in the time and in the place of Chazal, this is the area in halacha that is subject to change. Because by nedarim halech achar loshem b'nei adam, the chiddush of the Mishnah is that in the times of Rabbi, even in the locations where people made bread from many different types of raw materials, not only from the chamesha saminim, they made bread from potatoes that didn't exist. They made bread from rice or from millet. People pas is only chamisha saminim, which is why it's included in this halacha.